Dear colleagues, good afternoon. The report Investigation of New Features for Improving the Method of Message Transmission Without Joining Stagings to your attention for consideration is presented. The purpose is to substantiate the options for modifying and improving the original method of transmitting messages without joining stagings. See bibliography if necessary for more detailed consideration. Key categories. First of all, of course, I would like to draw attention to the objective difficulties of a sufficiently correct and monosyllabic translation of this representation, namely without joining stagings. Initially, the method represented a formalized idea in the totality of the technical and software tools that form it, implementing in the generally accepted sense a virtual multi-channel communication environment, referring in particular to the background of the issue. There is an indirect relation to transputer technologies as well as various satellite communication protocols, which are characterized by the presence of a significant amount of data on the fly. In part, it seems possible to consider it as a generalized solution communication channel with duplex diversity in the limit of this implementation, in conditions of ensuring the effective use of the resources of the operating environment as a whole, with the resumption of super-cycle synchronization in dynamic network in particular. In short, the introduction of a time-appropriate redundancy of the transmitted message is implemented to prevent a failure when a time-limited communication channel is broken and the violation of the integrity of the message in modern reading is applicable in various applications. Among them you can specify such as, for example, pervasive informatics and advanced assistive technologies, processing of ultra-large data arrays, co-navigation and edge computing, etc. The conditioned motivation of the subject and content of the study in the context of promising tasks of control in mechatronic systems and robotic control. Modern trends in the development of communication and telecommunication systems are focused on achieving levels of more efficient use of electromagnetic spectrum resources, the creation of new signal code structures, and the concomitant development of problem-oriented elements of artificial intelligence and/or other measures by human-centered computing. Particularly noteworthy are the post-Shannon measures. For example, in the context of 6G, it is also possible that photonic technologies, the list can be continued, for which the use of the space-time factor, the accuracy of the positioning of objects, the features of the implementation of new mechatronics tools, etc. is important. At the same time, in turn, some participants probably drew attention to the absence of a general mathematical formalization of these conditions in the report, so some considerations on this are as follows. This slide deliberately contains illustrations from the popular 9 dots puzzle. In this case, it has a metaphorical meaning which can be correlated in the context of expanding the original idea of the current report. To some extent, it also intends to compensate for the absence in the report of a set of replenishable particular problems in a mathematically formalized form. So, but to what extent is the subject of the study related to the directions of the conference? In general terms, the key representation of the general scheme of the solution as when considering the previous fragments respectively with the initially used networks based on radial basis functions, the essentially use of a generalized approach of nonlinear transformation of the initial data of the operating environment in new spaces with a change in dimension, Along with RBF, the use of the adjacent elastic map method has a good potential. The originality of this investigation, the practical implementation is covered by the use of a stratified nested model when the most variable area is allocated from the initial similarity area of a larger scale. Spacetime is also taken into account. Moreover, this signal space under study in this case is described in terms of A. N. Radchenko neurophysiological approach. However, within the framework of this report, an abstract issue of the interaction of manned and uncrewed vehicle and the formation of principles for the construction of M2M protocols for heterogeneous robotics objects was previously highlighted for consideration. In the future, the development of interpretation is proposed to substantiate the applied tasks of improving the method of message transmission without joining stagings with the representation of a solution tube during the formation and specialization of the interconnect. Several proposals for the development of data transmission methods and the redistribution of tasks between multiscale heterogeneous computing resources are substantiated. Use geometric objects. A single isoist is the volume of space visible from a given point in space together with a specification of the location of that point. Besides, the so-called stigmergy is of interest. The mode of action carried out here is that the individual trace left in the functioning environment contributes to the subsequent behavior of the same or another associated agent. So, for convenience of visual representation, illustration of the end-mail isoist as well as animation of one of the examples of the modifiers are placed on this slide from left to right. Thus, this report is also an invitation to further discussion, including, if necessary, a permanent All-Moscow seminar. Of course, within the limits of one report, it is not possible to present many cause and effect relationships of the themes under consideration. However, a figurative understanding of the conditions for improving the previously indicated method of message transmission is of no small importance for the subsequent stages of complex research. So, the substantiation of options for modifying and improving the method of transmitting messages without joining stagings is presented. Scientific and technical groundwork can be useful when setting new tasks for monitoring the activity and communication of heterogeneous equipment status, predominantly for model objects robotic control. This report was not intended to present practical results, but at present all this constitutes the aggregate content of comprehensive studies to collect the necessary experimental data. In theory, it is of interest to generalize practices for the formation of new pertinent modifiers when processing these data for various precedent sets at human-centered computing. In turn, taking into account the post-COVID weakening of restrictions, efforts are now being renewed to activity in the field at the junction of cyber-physical systems and physiology in the context of substantiation and support of the integration components of assistive technologies. Thank you so much for your attention. My spoken English may not be good enough. In this regard, I will be ready to answer questions in writing by email or in Russian now with the help of translation by the head of the section.